Hey everybody, let's talk Portuguese. In today's video, we're going to be talking all about the usage of the word the in Portuguese. Before we get into today's video, if you've been watching my videos and you enjoy linguistics, Portuguese, or all things related to languages and culture, I invite you to join my Discord. I have a server set up for this channel where you can talk about all of the things that I cover on this channel and more to your heart's content. The invite link to the Discord server is available in the description of all of my videos, as well as directly on my channel should you ever want to go find it. And so whether you're learning Portuguese or English, or you'd like to improve one or the other, or you'd simply like to have a new group of people to chat with, I definitely recommend coming and chatting with us on Discord. Also, if you've been enjoying my channel and the videos that I make on it, you can support me on Patreon. Patreon is like a tip jar for this channel. My videos are free to watch, and they always will be. But if you would like to support my channel with something extra, you can do so on Patreon. And with that, let's get to the video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about the definite article and its usage and history in Portuguese. Now, the definite article is one of the basic building blocks of Portuguese grammar, and it is in many other Western languages as well, especially the Romance languages. But just to catch up on the grammar before we get started, the definite article is a type of word that specifies a noun or a noun phrase. The sense of definiteness gives us an idea of specificity or uniqueness to the noun or noun phrase. So when we say o objeto, we're saying the object instead of any given object. Now, Portuguese is a Romance language, and the Romance languages are all descended from Latin. This much is also quite basic. But Latin itself did not use a definite article. Now, in modern languages, the definite article is missing from quite a lot of languages. It is by no means a universal feature in world languages. There are languages that are not in any capacity related to Portuguese, like Japanese, that don't mark definiteness at all and therefore don't have a definite article. And there are other languages that are a little bit more closely related to Portuguese, such as Russian, which is a Slavic language, which is part of the Indo-European language family, that also do not use definite articles. Most of the Slavic languages, in fact, do not have a definite article. And so you might be wondering how we went from Latin having different grammatical patterns and structures and no definite article to Portuguese, which has the grammar that we know today, and indeed the extensive usage of a definite article. The tendency in language is that when ambiguity arises, we tend to fill in the gaps in other ways. And this is indeed what happened with Latin as it was transforming into the Romance languages. Latin, of course, did not have a definite article, but it would specify things by using demonstratives. A demonstrative is a word like this or that points out or distinguishes things. So Latin had a word meaning that in the form of ille, illa, illud, and it used this to specify things. This demonstrative not only gave us the definite article in Portuguese, but it also gave us the pronouns il and ella. When you look at how ille and illa are written, you can very clearly see their etymological inheritance in the Portuguese il and ella. Over time, this meaning of specificity, or pointing something out among a group of other things like it, turned into the modern sense of the definite article. In English, we have the definite article in the form of the word the. The word the is pretty convenient because we don't have to mark it for gender, and we don't have to mark it for number or whether or not it's plural. In Portuguese, as Latin did before it, we have grammatical gender. Grammatical gender is simply a way of categorizing nouns and the words that modify them. And Latin itself actually had three genders. It had neuter, masculine, and feminine. Modern Portuguese and all of the other major Romance languages, barring Romanian, only has two grammatical genders. Those are masculine and feminine. And so our Portuguese definite article reflects both gender and number, or whether it's plural, which is how we get the definite articles o, a, os, ash. Now, we have the definite article and use it quite extensively in English. And the same can be said for the Portuguese definite article, although the Portuguese definite article is used a little bit more extensively than in English. Indeed, the Portuguese definite article is used in much the same way to express definiteness of a thing or specify a thing, but the usage in Portuguese goes a little bit beyond what we do in English. For example, in Portuguese, the definite article is used with subject or definite concept concept where in English we would omit it. It is also often used with names, and this is something that is somewhat unusual in the Romance languages. In standard usage in other Romance languages, we see this form in Catalan, for example. It is widespread in the entire Portuguese-speaking domain. Generally speaking, using the article before a name in Portuguese denotes a certain amount of proximity. And in some stylistic standards in Portuguese, you would never use the article before people you do not know. The usage of the article before names is more universal in Portugal than it is in Brazil, but it is by no means unknown in Brazil. And in the same way, using the article before a name is significantly more common and standard when we're talking about one name as opposed to a person's whole name. This is usually a person's first name, but it can also be a person's last name. We often say o João or a Maria, but it is a little bit less common to say something like o João Santos or a Maria Vasconcelos. We also use the definite article with possessives. We have forms like o meu, o teu, o seu, and so on. This use of the article with possessives has parallels in other Romance languages as well, including Catalan and Italian. And yet again, this usage is more universal in Portugal, where in Brazil you can often hear people speaking in a way that omits the article before the possessive. In Portuguese, it is considered more formal to omit the article before possessive, so in academic and other more formal styles of writing, you will often see the article omitted before the possessive. But in most uses, especially in Portugal, the form that you will see is with the article. Now, up to here, we've had some fairly easy to digest examples of when we use the definite article in Portuguese and how they are different to English. But now I want to move on to what is arguably the most confusing and arbitrary usage of the definite article in Portuguese, and that, of course, is the usage of the definite article with places. Now, many people are taught in their Portuguese classes in grade school, or in their Portuguese as a second language classes, that we have a set of steadfast rules that we should use to intuit whether or not we use an article with a given place. And generally speaking, this rule goes as follows. Cities do not take a definite article, whereas states or regions do. Countries take a definite article unless they were intimately linked to Portuguese in the later period of colonization. And continents and all other geographic indicators also always take the indefinite article. And that is what's taught with some level of variation in Portuguese classes all over the place. But, of course, those rules aren't exactly rules, and so let's go through each different type of place one by one to see what the exceptions to them are and whether they actually hold up as rules. Generally speaking, the rule is taught that cities don't take a definite article, except that there are so many cities in Portuguese that take a definite article. There are cities not just in Portugal, but also in Brazil, and there are cities that take an article in other places that seem to do so for an arbitrary reason. Quite often, the reason why a city will have a definite article is for etymological reasons. The name for the city comes from the word for something else in Portuguese. So when we have examples like the Brazilian city of o Recife, we say no Recife because Recife is a word that means reef in Portuguese. The same thing also applies to the Portuguese city of Porto, which obviously just means port. And it's worth mentioning that Brazil tends to hold more steadfast to this rule than Portugal. We don't say no São Paulo or no Porto Alegre, but in Portugal we have a whole bunch of cities that have the definite article. Examples include a Figueira da Foz, a Covilhã, o Seixal, and many, many others. And this usage can vary between Brazil and Portugal as well. If we take the city of Dubai, for example, in European Portuguese it is standard to use the definite article with Dubai. We say no Dubai instead of em Dubai. But in Brazil they would say em Dubai. And this takes us into the rule that states or regions take a definite article. While indeed most Brazilian states and states in the United States, as well as regions of countries like Spain and elsewhere, do indeed take an article, there are plenty of exceptions to this. If we focus just on the example of Brazil, we can see that there's not a lot of rhyme or reason as to why a state might lose the definite articles, such as Alagoas. This variation over time can be related to etymology, saying as Alagoas refers to the etymological origins of the name, and omitting the article altogether is simply the contemporary form we seem to have settled on. The opposite is true with the state of Goiás. Many speakers in Brazil will say o Goiás, even though the normative form is to say Goiás without an article. And indeed, countries that have long-standing historic connections to Portugal, such as Spain, also have variation in the usage of the article with their regions. So for example, we might say a Galiza, as Asturias, a Catalunya, but we would simply say Castela or Aragão. So when we look at the usage of the definite article with cities or states and regions, we can conclude that there's no steadfast, hard, fixed rule as to whether or not we're going to be using a definite article. Now let's move on to countries, and the rule here is supposedly that all countries take an article except those that were intimately linked with Portugal at some point in time, or some variation thereof. Now this, if you look at a map, does not hold up under scrutiny. There are a lot of different reasons for this, and so let's get into all of them. The first is that there are some countries that can optionally take an article in Portuguese, like Spain, France, or England, and the next reason is even more contentious. There are in fact differing official standards as to which countries take which articles in Portuguese. In the case of Brazil, the Brazilian Foreign Service has officially established guidelines as to which countries take which article, and these are often at odds with current usage in Portugal. This leads to cases like the country of Morocco, where the official usage in Brazil is with the article, or no Marrocos, but outside of Brazil, the standard usage is without an article, or em Marrocos. And there's not a lot of rhyme or reason here either as to which countries have a divergence in their standards or not. You simply have to know it. Also, countries that don't take an article are not necessarily historically linked with Portugal. It is of course true that the majority of former Portuguese possessions do not take an article. We do indeed say Angola and not o Angola, Mozambique and not o Mozambique, but the biggest and most obvious glaring exception to this is Brazil itself, which was arguably the most important Portuguese colony over time. And naturally we say o Brasil without exception in Portuguese. The remaining rules are a little bit more straightforward. The rule with continents is that continents all take the definite article, except for in Portugal where we say Africa without a definite article. And we can also confirm the rule that we use the article with geographic features, so oceans, lakes, rivers, and so on. We would say o Atlântico for o Oceano Atlântico. We would say o Baikal for o Lago Baikal. O Sena or o Nilo for o Rio Sena, o Rio Nilo, and so on. It can even form part of the proper name of the place itself, such as in the case of a Península Ibérica. And this, as it turns out, is the only rule that doesn't really have an exception in Portuguese. So if we look at all of these different types of places and put them all together and think about the supposed rules that were taught in classes, we can certainly confirm that those rules are not necessarily rules at all, but simple sets of guidelines that are quite often not applicable. On the whole, if we're talking about the usage of the definite article with places, you simply have to know when you use it and when you don't. Now, the development of definite articles is a fairly common process in languages around the world, and the more or less extensive usage of the definite article is well documented in other languages around the globe. As usual, if we're asking a why question, like why did Portuguese develop a definite article, we don't necessarily have a good reason other than that it simply did. The speakers of late Latin or vulgar Latin used the demonstrative so extensively that it turned into our definite article. And the usage of the definite article would then go on to extend to plenty of other uses that we have that go above and beyond the ones that we have in other languages, such as English. And so with that, that's all I've got for this overview of the definite article in Portuguese. I hope that answered some of the questions that you may have had about it or satisfied your curiosity on the subject. If you'd like to know more about this topic or you'd like to follow it up with more information, I highly encourage you to leave me a comment down below, and I will certainly take it into consideration consideration for future videos. So that's all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you learned something or otherwise found it interesting, leave me a thumbs up down below. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you're not already. I make lots of videos about the Portuguese language, which you can find directly on my channel or in the eye above, and I will see you next time.
Não me interessa, eu